All right, Colts Nation, another week, another shocking amount of nothing at all from the Indianapolis Colts. And I'm sure maybe some of you are not shocked, but I will say, as someone who likes Ballard, even by his standards, and I know how conservative he is, I concede that to you, this does feel a little bit dry. It does feel a little bit slow, even for his standard. Now, I don't have a well-thought-out case as to whether or not that's objectively the truth or anything like that. I'm just saying, as far as my gut feel goes, which is really what I'm speaking to, having been a fan of the team and watching Chris Ballard operate, watching these off seasons, it does feel like things are moving a little bit slow this offseason, and I understand the aggravation we see out of the fan base right now. And when we talk about that aggravation, obviously there is no bigger topic to talk about than L'Jarius Sneed and that trade to the Tennessee Titans, of course, pending a physical, which I'm sure is what most of you want to hear me talk about. And of course, we will talk about that, but I also want to talk about the state of Julian Blackmon a little bit with the Indianapolis Colts. He's visited now the Bills, who have since signed Mike Edwards, and the 49ers on Thursday, yet no deal with the San Francisco 49ers. Is there actually potential for a future with Julian Blackmon on this team? I don't know. Perhaps. It's something that we're going to get to. And then Shane Steichen and Reggie Wayne attending Texas Pro Day. That is not just a piece of throwaway news that's significant for Colts fans. I'll explain why I feel that way. And that'll be that. But with that, let's start with Sneed, or really let's start with a quick disclaimer, right? Because my goal here as we talk about L'Jarius Sneed, which is inevitably going to turn into a conversation about Chris Ballard, how can it not, right, is to view this in a bit more of a holistic way, right? Because Ballard apologists, like myself, we're biased, right? We're inclined to defend Mr. Ballard. I want to make sure that I cover this thing objectively. So we will be covering things that will oppose that perspective today, I am sure, right? Because this is going to be a full-rounded conversation. And then if you hate Chris Ballard, I'm more than certain that there's going to be things said here that you don't agree with either. But again, the goal is to be as objective as I can be and have a fair discussion here about kind of how things are going without all the whining and the complaining and all that stuff. Just like a good, solid, reasonable conversation amongst reasonable Colts fans. It's what we do over here. So if you hate Ballard and you just plan on going into the comment sections with your years and years of pent-up anger, like, me, fire Chris Ballard, me, bargain bin Ballard has to go, or he stinks, he's a failure, whatever it is that you might say, just save it for someone else's comment section, okay? I really have no interest in it, at least in that. Now, if you want to have a real conversation about it, happy to do that. We all know that I read the comments, I answer many of them, so, that is what it is. So, as we begin this discussion, and I promise we will work our way into the L'Jarius Sneed deal. It's all a lead up. Don't worry. I'm taking it slow, all right? It's been a week. Let me riff a little bit, okay? Let's just make sure that we have the facts straight here as we paint the picture of this offseason as it currently stands, and really Chris Ballard as a whole, okay? So far, the Colts, you're not going to believe this. This is true. Go ahead and check the numbers. The Colts have spent the sixth most money in the NFL in free agency so far because, yes, whether you believe it or not, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, re-signs are free agents, okay? Whether or not it's sexy because they're not new guys is not the point. The Colts have spent the sixth most money in free agency. Our offense is now the 10th highest paid in all of the NFL, and our defense is now the 15th highest paid in all of the NFL, which is not really, just like right in the middle of the tier, right? Okay, so when we talk about Ballard and the Colts being cheap, and we say bargain bin Ballard, that is somewhat of a revision of the truth. Let's not lose sight of what it actually is. I think the better way to put it is that they're not very aggressive. They don't take swings, right? But what I just described is not cheap, okay? So let's just make sure we have that straight. Now, as far as, and that's not a defense of Chris Ballard, by the way, okay? I'm just giving you the literal numbers, and you can take from it what you may. That is that is fact. Like, that is not subjective. That wasn't my opinion. That was the truth, okay? Jeez. So as far as L'Jarius Sneed goes, the Colts' current effective cap space, which, by the way, effective cap space versus normal cap space, for those of you who don't know, essentially says, okay, here's your current roster, and this is what you have in cap space. Now, after the draft and your draft class, and you have a 51-man roster, which is technically the minimum. I know 53-man is what everyone aims to have, but technically to go out on a Sunday and play, you need 51 guys, not 53. So the effective cap space takes into account the upcoming draft class and what their contracts are going to be and what you would have with a 51-man roster, which in the Colts case is just the draft class, I'm pretty sure. $18.2 million in effective cap space for the Indianapolis Colts. Now, why is that number significant? Well, What did the Titans sign L'Jarius Sneed for? Does anyone know? You know. I know you know. It's more than $18.2 million, right? Right? Okay. So, literally, as the roster is currently constructed, I just want to make sure we all know this. The Colts, with what L'Jarius Sneed is demanding, literally did not have the money to pay him that, okay? I just want to make sure that's clear. Now, of course, they could have just gone and cut a guy like Mo Ali Cox to free up that cap space in a move that I've been suggesting since last offseason, but I really only bring it up to say this. It's not like the Colts are just swimming in a pool of never-ending money right now. If they had gone out and traded for L'Jarius Sneed, it would have been really their last move of the offseason, all things considered, before the draft. And I feel like no one is bringing that part up. I wanted to make sure that I brought it to you. Maybe I'm even the first one to do it. I'm not quite sure. Obviously, how could I know what everyone has said, right? Now, would the trade have been worth it for L'Jarius Sneed? Would it have been worth it to work something out with our cap and try to make it happen? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. Time will tell. I don't know. But you do get the sense, right, that this is going to be a move, if not the move, that we look back on as we go into this season and into next offseason. But make no mistake, the verdict is still out as to whether or not this was a good deal for L'Jarius Sneed in terms of the contract, of course, the trade compensation light. We're talking about the contract because as much as you think you know about the game, as much as I think I know about the game, neither of us are actually equipped with all the information we need to objectively say whether or not this was a good deal. So let's just keep that in check and make sure that we have the discussion the right way. But I will say this, for a guy in L'Jarius Sneed, who was considered to be one of the best corners in the league last year, a 2025 third-round pick, and a swap of seventh-round picks this year, does seem like pretty light trade compensation for what seemed to be, if you ask many Colts fans, to be such a no-brainer deal for the Indianapolis Colts to make, right? And of course, I am on record saying that I was okay with the Colts not making this deal the entire time. But then with that, the Titans getting him does make it feel like a bit bigger of a blow on the surface. And I'm certainly not saying it won't be. All I'm saying is the verdict is still out. I want to make sure we don't lose sight of that. But do keep in mind, the Chiefs are a very well-run organization. Now, of course, when you have Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, you can plug a lot of holes, and that is what it is. But the Chiefs are the cream of the crop. Clearly, the results speak for themselves. The proof is in the pudding. Chiefs are one of the best organizations in football. That is not to be debated. We can't debate that. Of all the things we can debate, that is not one of them. So, really, my question is twofold when it comes to this thing, and it all goes back to L'Jarius Sneed. Number one, if he is everything that everyone is saying he is, and I'm not saying he isn't, why is it that the Chiefs, who had the money to do it, why were they so sure that they were not going to pay L'Jarius Sneed? Like, why didn't they just do it themselves? I mean, after all, he was in their building. If anyone knows him, it's them. Why did they not do the contract if it was such a great deal to make? Number one. And number two, again, goes back to the compensation. A third-round pick and a swap of seventh-rounders. Those two observations right there, for me, don't align with the statement that L'Jarius Sneed is a lockdown, amazing corner. I'm not saying he is not. I'm just saying those are two things to observe when we look at this trade, and it's two things that kind of have me not so sure as to what to feel here. And I'm not saying any of this, by the way, to lighten the blow for Colts fans or anything like that. Again, I'm just laying out the bigger picture to make sure that when we have this discussion, we're looking at it from all angles, okay? So, something to keep in mind with L'Jarius Sneed. But with that, as we see another move that we thought the Colts might make slip through the cracks, it does make you wonder, what in the hell is Chris Ballard's plan this offseason? Now, I am certain that he has one, right? Whether or not you agree or disagree with what he's going to do is separate from the matter at hand, right? He has to have something in mind for the Indianapolis Colts this offseason. After all, when he outlined the plan going into the offseason, the primary message was that they needed to be more explosive on the offensive side of the ball, and they needed to stop explosive plays on the defensive side of the ball, which heavily implies that we would need help on the back end and in the secondary, yet we've done nothing in terms of the secondary so far. Now, him acknowledging this does not change the fact, or that fact really, and the fact that we right now have on paper, without Julian Blackmon, arguably the worst group of safeties in all of football, or at least the most proven. Of course, you don't know if Nick Cross can come out and prove something, but we're just talking what's in front of us. There's not a lot to be excited about when it comes to the Colts safety room. So we've not made any moves at corner, and we're all kind of sitting here again saying, what exactly is the plan here. And I'm not saying that it's going to be wrong what he does. I just want to make sure that we tell the Chris Ballard story the right way as we continue through this offseason and we judge him. So we're going to unpack that a little bit before getting into the topics I mentioned at the top of the show, which are Julian Blackmon and everything that comes with that, and Shane Steichen, Xavier Worthy, really not Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell. I just gave away the whole point of that segment. Them attending Shane Steichen and Reggie Wayne, the Texas Pro Day. But before we get into it, you know what it is. Got to introduce myself. My name is Justin. This right here is the Ride on the Bench Colts podcast. As always, ask anyone on YouTube and enjoying, go ahead, shoot a like and help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Subscribe if you are continuing to come back and enjoy the show. We are so close to 2,200. We want to be all the way at 3,000 by the start of next season, but we just got to take it 100 subs at a time. 2,200 is the first goal. Maybe today's the day. Most importantly, though, let's just enjoy the discussion. Let's be civil with one another. Let's have a little kumbaya in the state of affairs that we see with the Indianapolis Colts. So let me start, as we're really going to talk about Chris Ballard at this point. Let me just give my stance outright, okay? And then I'm going to break down, kind of why I feel that way a little bit more, right? I by no means think that Chris Ballard is one of the top 5 GMs in football right now or anything like that. And even if I did feel that he's better, and I do feel that he's better than many give him credit for, when it comes to results, you can't argue him into the top 5. It just is what it is. But he is certainly far from the worst. Far from it, right? But with that, I agree with many of you guys, right? I know the classic Ballard apologist move is to talk about Andrew Luck and his retirement. I agree with you guys. That is no longer an excuse. Let me get a little bit of water right here. That's no longer an excuse. That ended for me personally the moment that we got Anthony Richardson. In fact, I'd say that Ballard should have at most Anthony Richardson's rookie contract to turn this thing around. But realistically, it needs to start this offseason for me. And really, actually, it started last offseason, but I thought last offseason was fantastic. I think that was kind of widely most of our opinions. We really enjoyed last offseason. So, that does not change the fact, though, that his time here has not been anywhere close to as bad as you guys make it out to be. Despite the fact that I just met you in the middle and agreed with you on some of these things, I'd like to just talk about this a little bit, all right? Let's start with the past season as it relates to Chris Ballard, right? Because we cannot forget about the end of that Browns game. I know I'm in excuse mode right now. I am stuttering all over the place. This is what happens when you go a while without recording an episode. You just completely lose your chops, right? Neither here nor there. Not my best recording, but we're rolling with it, okay? I was on record after that Browns game. You go and check if you want, but it's old news at this point. As everyone was talking about the Colts getting screwed at the end of that game, I didn't deny that as a factor. I was just saying that perhaps they could have not been in that position if they had executed better throughout the course of the game. There are many examples of that at the time that I basically forget at this point. But I know in the moment I very much thought that was true. With that, again, if we had not gotten screwed at the end of that game, we'd have made the playoffs, right? Right? Now, listen, I understand if your aunt had a dick, she would be your uncle, okay? So I don't want to get caught up in the world of make-believes and ifs and what-ifs and all of that stuff, but to pretend this past season was some sort of horrible, disastrous season filled with nothing but trash football is really a bit of a stretch. And regardless of that, I will concede to you, again, me meeting the Ballard haters in the middle, that even if this was a fringe playoff team, to just have a fringe playoff team, which is what the Colts are, and to just stand pat with that is a very, very risky game to play if you're Chris Ballard, and one that could bite you in the ass tremendously. So I am going to put that on the table. But with that, I would like to give the cliff notes of the Colts under Chris Ballard season by season, not like in like a long-winded manner, but just to make sure that we're looking at this thing the right way. We take part in revisionist history solved, and I want to make sure we don't do it here. So largely, for starters, by the way, why was it that we got rid of Ryan Grigson, for those of you who were a fan at the time? Why was it that we did that? Well, of course, the simplified version of the story, and really the main point of the story, was that we couldn't protect Andrew Luck. Is that correct? Now, of course, the whole roster left a bit to be desired, but if you were to just pinpoint one single reason that the Colts got rid of Ryan Grigson, it was the fact that Andrew Luck was not being protected in the way he should have been as the franchise quarterback. Do we agree? Just want to make sure we're on the same page right there. Now, with that being said, we look at season by season, Chris Ballard. So Chris Ballard takes over going into the 2017 season. This is a season that Andrew Luck misses with a shoulder injury, okay? 4-12. Terrible. Hate to see that. I forget who was scored. Was that the Scott Tolzien year? Horrific. Hated all of it, okay? We now come back to the 2018 season where Andrew Luck returns after a season-long layoff and a grueling rehab process, okay? Colts go 10-6. Andrew Luck gets sacked the least amount of times he had ever been sacked throughout the course of a full season in his entire career, okay? That was first line of business for Chris Ballard. Why we brought him in was to protect Andrew Luck, okay? So bang, there it was right there, okay? He did that. So that was a check for Chris Ballard right off the bat, okay? Go into 2019, Andrew Luck retires, okay? But going into that season with Andrew Luck at quarterback, the Colts were viewed not as the favorite to come out of the AFC and win the Super Bowl or anything like that, but amongst the favorites to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. That is true. We can't forget that. So now you're talking really, and I'm going to, 2017, even if it was a good year, I would have kind of discounted it. It's hard to even hold any GM accountable for like that first season. They're just starting to clean up the mess, right? So we have 2018, 2019, 2 seasons where the story around Chris Ballard was not that he was trash. It was quite the opposite. We were all very excited about what he was doing. But again, Luck retires, bang. Now you have a roster that was a favorite with a quarterback to go to the Super Bowl. One of the favorites in the AFC. Now, whether or not that would have happened isn't my point. I'm just talking about perception from the fan base, from the league. Okay? And that is where they go and they start patching up the quarterback. Now, 2020, 11-5. Playoffs. We lose 27-24 off the top of my head to the Bills. I might be wrong, but sounds about right. But there's a playoff season. Okay. So now we're all the way to 2020 without any real disaster or shit from Chris Ballard, which is over half the time that we talk about in terms of this disastrous reign under Chris Ballard. Okay. Now, 2021, of course, is the Wentz season. I, at the time, would say, well, listen, he took a chance with his coach, Frank Reich. Neither here nor there. I can't defend that, okay? So really what we talk about with this is 2021 and 2022. And it is those 2 seasons right there that I feel Colts fans kind of take and now just erase everything that happened prior. That is my stance on that as a whole. Now, my point in this is just to say this. For those of you that say this has just been 7 seasons of complete and utter incompetence and failure and shitty football, that is just revisionist history. That is not true. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's been fantastic Super Bowl football, okay? But it was hardly fireable work from Chris Ballard, if at all, okay? Now, as far as the division titles go, I will say this. I don't know why we're so obsessed with the idea of a division title. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to win a division, but if you weren't going to be the 1 seed and you end up making the playoffs anyway without winning the division, does it really matter all that much if you won the division or not? At least for me, I don't know. You may have some people who are very smart that disagree with me on that, but that's just kind of that's where I stand on that type of thing. Okay, so with that, that's all the Ballard talk. That's how I feel about the Sneed talk. We'll see how that goes. I was not losing any sleep over not having him. Him being on the Titans, I suppose, has a little bit of a wrinkle and an argument against Chris Ballard when we get to that point. Now, let's shift into Julian Blackmon here, because I felt that he was the odd man out going into this offseason, and I was pretty confident that we would let him walk. I mean, after all, with all the re-signs that we had done early on, if he was going to be one of them, wouldn't it have happened during that period, right? I mean, that only makes sense. But the more I watch this thing play out with Julian Blackmon, water again, Lord. Sorry about that. I'm not sure if that makes this unwatchable or not, but I'm not going to go back and edit it. I'll be honest with you. The more I watch this thing play out with Julian Blackmon, the more I'm considering the possibility that he may actually re-sign with the Indianapolis Colts, or at least that the door is open to doing business on both sides, right? Because it would at least explain why the Colts haven't gone out and signed someone else at the safety position, right? Perhaps his injury history has both he and the Colts a little unsure as to what his market value might be. But as of right now, it does seem like we're in a bit of a waiting game as to seeing what that is in terms of what he's being offered and whether or not the Colts are willing to match whatever is offered. And I kind of think that explains on some levels the inactivity at safety. So we'll see how it goes. I would like to have him back, even if I felt in the secondary that he was a little bit more replaceable than Kenny Moore. There is no doubt that we need so much help at safety even with Julian Blackmon around, that we can't afford to not address it. But I'm starting to think that maybe the possibility of him being in Indy is a bit more existent than we had given it some credit for. So we'll see how that plays out. Now, finally, back end of the episode, Shane Steichen, Reggie Wayne at Texas Pro Day watching those studs in Adonai Mitchell and Xavier Worthy. Now, everyone is talking about Xavier Worthy and the prospect of him on the Indianapolis Colts, and I love what he brings to the table, by the way, but is no one talking about Adonai Mitchell? I want to be on this train before it's cool, okay? Because this guy is spectacular. By the way, I always plug this episode when I have the chance. It's in the description. I did a full breakdown of all the wide receivers. If you're at this point in the episode and you haven't watched that one yet, go ahead at the end of this one and go watch that one. You're talking 14 receivers in this draft. There's like almost 40 minutes worth of content. I'm the only person in all of Colts Nation that gives you that piece. I'm just being honest about it. It's a full breakdown of all those receivers and how they fit into the Indianapolis Colts. And whatever, you can watch that if you want. But Adonai Mitchell, when you talk about the idea of a receiver in the first round, we don't know if that's where we're going to go, but everyone talks about Brian Thomas. Adonai Mitchell, number one, his RAS score is higher than Brian Thomas. Now, I'm not someone who personally values that on a huge level, but that is like one of Ballard's huge pieces of criteria. And when you compare the game, the tape on the field of Thomas and Mitchell, I'm not talking about the 40-yard dash, and I'm not talking about all that shit. I don't care about that shit. I'm talking about on the field, okay? Football, like real football, you know? To me, it's almost not even close between these two as to who's better. And the fact that not everyone feels that way makes me question it a little bit. But when you look at Brian Thomas, sure, he's fast. Sure, he could get down the field. But for a guy who's as fast as he is, you don't see a whole ton of separation all that often down the field. And in terms of his ability to get open, I mean, there's really not much nuance to his game as a route runner. But Adonai Mitchell, on the other hand, is absolutely spectacular. And a dream for me would be for the Colts to reach on him at number 15. I do fear that they end up trading back from that pick, which is going to send Colts Nation into a frenzy. But for a guy like Mitchell, for me, I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with this. I would love the Colts to draft him. Xavier Worthy, great. But the idea that you have Steichen and Reggie Wayne at that pro day shows me that they are looking at least one of these Texas guys. And while everyone is talking about Worthy, I don't want us to lose sight of Adonai Mitchell, who is one of my favorite receivers in this draft. I'm not convinced he won't end up the best receiver in this draft. That's how good he is. And that's where I stand. There's a bit more to talk about there, of course, when it comes to their game. But again, go watch the other video. I already did all the stuff on the wide receivers and all that stuff. Again, please do yourself a favor. Ultimate resource for Colts fans. And that's it. That's the whole episode. I don't feel like that was my most fluent or smooth episode, to be honest with you. But we're putting it out. It is what it is. I got to get it out. So until next time, my name was Justin. This right here was the Ride on the Bench Colts podcast. And as always, go Colts.